was a quiet morning in the small town of Willow Bend. The sun rose slowly over the sleepy rooftops, casting a golden hue across the trees that lined the quiet streets. In one of the modest homes tucked near the edge of town lived George, a 78-year-old widower with a kind smile and tired eyes. He had once been a school principal, a man of discipline and routine, but now his days blended together like watercolors in the rain. Since his wife passed 5 years ago, George had found comfort in familiarity: his old armchair by the window, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock, and the same breakfast each morning: one slice of toast, half a banana, and a warm cup of black coffee. This morning, however, something stirred inside him. As he sipped his coffee and looked out the window, he noticed a young couple walking briskly down the street, hand in hand, laughing freely. Something about the rhythm of their steps, the lightness in their movements, made him pause. He set down his mug, the warmth still lingering in his hands, and stood up slowly. His knees ached a little more than usual, but he ignored it. He reached for his jacket, opened the front door, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of dewy grass and blooming jasmine from his neighbor's yard. George took one step, then another. He had not gone for a walk in months, maybe years, not since the funeral. But this morning, the street beckoned him. He walked slowly at first, unsure, cautious. Each step seemed to whisper a reminder of strength, of life, of the man he used to be. As he moved down the block, his breathing steadied, and a quiet sense of calm settled over him. He passed a row of familiar houses: Mrs. Donnelly's place with the bright red door, the Jenkins home with the white porch swing, and the corner where he used to wait for the school bus with his daughter years ago. Each landmark felt like an old friend, gently nudging him forward. The walk wasn't long, just 10 minutes to the end of the street and back. But by the time George returned home, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long while: lighter, more present, alive. He sat back down in his chair, heart still beating a little faster than usual, and smiled. Not because the walk was remarkable, but because he had taken it. That night, George lay in bed and thought about the walk, about how something so small, so simple, had lifted his spirits. He remembered something his wife once said after their daughter left for college: every day, no matter how hard, is worth stepping into. Back then, he thought she meant getting through tough times, but now he understood she meant literally taking a step, moving forward, staying in motion. The next morning, George walked again. This time, he went a little further. He nodded to a jogger who passed by, exchanged smiles with a mail carrier, and paused near the park to watch a group of children chase bubbles in the wind. It was as if the world had color again. Within a week, walking became his morning ritual. The ache in his knees remained, but it no longer kept him still. He noticed he was sleeping better, thinking clearer, even laughing more when he watched the evening news. He wasn't trying to change the world, just his own little part of it. And it all started with one step. One afternoon, he stopped by the community center to pick up a flyer he saw on the notice board. It read, "Walk with us, Senior Wellness Walk every Saturday at 9 a.m. He folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. That Saturday, he showed up, not because he needed company, but because something inside him wanted it. That morning, a dozen seniors gathered by the oak trees in the town park. Some wore sneakers, others used walking sticks. George recognized a few faces from town: the librarian, a retired postman, and a woman he hadn't seen in decades. Her name was Helen, and she had been in his high school English class. She remembered him. He remembered her laugh. As they walked together, sharing memories and stories, George felt a warmth that no sunshine could match. It wasn't just the movement or the fresh air. It was the connection, the companionship, the shared experience of simply walking towards something better. Week after week, the walks continued. The group grew. Some brought their grandchildren. Others brought dogs. They laughed. They shared recipes. They discussed books and news and memories of their youth. George found himself looking forward to Saturdays like a child looks forward to summer. And soon, those walks became more than a routine. They became a reason to get up, to show up, to keep going. Because every step he took was not just about movement, it was a declaration that life was still happening, that he was still part of it. George's story isn't just about walking. It's about choosing to engage with life, even when the world feels quiet. It's about finding strength in motion, in connection, and in the smallest acts of courage. And it's a reminder for us all, no matter our age, that it is never too late to take the first step. Helen's eyes lit up at the idea, and within a week, the Saturday Walkers became the Saturday Readers too. After their stroll through the park, a small group would gather on the benches under the shade of the old oak trees, each with a book in hand and a story in their hearts. Some read aloud, others simply listened. Discussions blossomed about characters, about memories, about life. The reading circle didn't just rekindle George's love for literature, it sparked something beautiful in the community. People began sharing their favorite books, swapping titles, and even writing down reflections in little notebooks. For many, it had been years since they discussed stories like this. For George, it felt like coming home to a part of himself he thought he'd left behind. The routine gave shape to his days and warmth to his weeks. It wasn't just about reading. It was about learning, sharing, and remembering that the mind, like the body, needed movement too, through curiosity, through connection, and through the wonder of new ideas. As George turned the pages, both in books and in life, he discovered that aging didn't mean fading away. It meant having the time to rediscover old passions, to nurture the spark of wonder, and to build new chapters from the quiet strength of all the ones that came before. Each day, George sat at the small keyboard near his window, letting the morning light fall across the keys as he practiced. The notes came slowly, unevenly at first, but they were his, tiny victories with every scale, every chord. He wasn't trying to be perfect, he was trying to feel. The music, however simple, filled the house with a new kind of warmth. It was like letting fresh air into a long-closed room. It made him smile, sometimes even laugh at his own mistakes. But most of all, it made him feel alive. Soon the others began sharing their own progress. Helen brought her first watercolor painting, an impression of the park with wide strokes of soft greens and blues. Another member, Ruth, knitted a scarf with the name of the book club stitched along one end. On one breezy afternoon, the group decided to display their creations at the community center. They called it The Joy of Trying. It wasn't a contest, just a celebration of what it meant to learn, to grow, to play again. Neighbors came, curious at first, then moved by what they saw. Colorful paintings, uneven pottery, a hand-built birdhouse, and even a short poem about walking in the rain. George played a simple melody on his keyboard, hesitant but proud. The applause that followed wasn't just for the music, it was for the courage, the effort, and the beauty of becoming something new, even in the later chapters of life. For George and his friends, aging no longer meant slowing down. It meant opening up. They weren't just adding years, they were adding experiences. Every note played, every brushstroke made, every paragraph read was a reminder that life in all its stages still had so much to offer. The group that began with quiet footsteps had now become a small orchestra of discovery, reminding each other that it is never too late to begin. George's small house, once filled with silence and the soft ticking of a clock, had come alive with melodies that held memories, laughter, and the echo of days long past. The neighbors began to notice. On warm afternoons when the windows were open, the sound of George's playing drifted down the block, mingling with birdsong and the rustle of leaves. People paused as they walked by. Some smiled. A few stopped just to listen. One child, curious and brave, knocked on his door one day and asked if she could watch him play. George welcomed her in and, with a twinkle in his eye, showed her how to find middle C. Her small fingers danced clumsily over the keys, and the sound of their shared laughter filled the room. That child came back again the next week, and then the week after. Soon, other children followed. George became an accidental teacher again, guiding young minds not through textbooks, but through music, stories, and conversation. He found that teaching came back to him naturally. The patience, the encouragement, the joy of watching someone discover their own rhythm. These simple moments, born out of kindness and curiosity, rekindled a sense of purpose in him that he hadn't realized he was missing. It wasn't long before George decided to host a small gathering every other Friday in his living room. They called it Tunes and Tales. Children came with parents or grandparents. Seniors came with stories to share. They played music, read poems, and sometimes just talked about life. There were cookies on the table, tea in the pot, and laughter in the air. What had started as a single walk had now grown into a whole community, a web of connections stitched together by music, memory, and the quiet courage to begin again. George often thought of his wife during these evenings. He imagined her in the corner, smiling with that familiar look of quiet pride. She had always believed in making the most of every day, and now, in some way, he was living her words. Her favorite saying echoed in his mind often: every day, no matter how hard, is worth stepping into. He had stepped into many since she passed, some heavy with grief, some filled with joy. But each one was real, and each one mattered. His home, once a retreat from a too quiet world, had become a gathering place of sounds and stories. In his twilight years, George had not only rekindled his own spark, but had lit a small flame in others. And though time continued its steady march, bringing its aches and losses, George knew now that the heart could still dance, the mind could still learn, and the soul could still sing. He had become, without meaning to, a gentle reminder to everyone around him that aging was not an end, but a shift, a soft turning towards something just as beautiful. And in his music, in his words, in his walks and his welcome, he gave others the courage to step forward too. Because sometimes the quietest steps make the loudest echoes, and in George's world, every echo mattered. That same week, while browsing through a small bookstore near the library, George stumbled across a display of brain games, crossword puzzles, logic problems, and chess strategy books. He smiled, thinking back to a story Helen had shared during one of their Saturday gatherings. She had once played chess with her late husband every weekend. It was their ritual, their way of connecting through quiet concentration and gentle competition. George picked up a small book of logic puzzles and decided to give it a try. The first puzzle took longer than he expected. His brain, so accustomed to routine, needed time to adjust to these new challenges. But something interesting happened as he persisted. He began to feel the same kind of satisfaction he got from learning the piano, a sense of discovery, of sharpening something inside himself that had grown soft with disuse. Finishing each puzzle was like completing a journey, with small triumphs hidden along the way. He brought the puzzle book to their next reading circle. As the group sat under the old oak tree, sipping tea and talking about the latest novel, George pulled out the book and passed it around. "Who's up for a challenge?" he asked, half joking, half hopeful. To his delight, several friends leaned in, curious. Soon, they were working together, laughing over tricky clues, celebrating each solution like a little victory. It became a new part of their tradition: books and brain games, a balance of imagination and logic. Weeks passed, and George noticed how different he felt. His memory, once unpredictable, now seemed steadier. He recalled names more easily, details from conversations, moments from long ago that returned like old photographs found in a drawer. But more than that, he noticed how his perspective had widened. He felt more present in each moment, more patient, more reflective. His days, once blurred together, now held texture and meaning. One Saturday, Helen arrived at the park with a chess set under her arm. "I thought it was time I got back into this," she said with a smile. George accepted the challenge with good humor, though he hadn't played in years. They set up under the tree, and as the first game began, the rest of the group gathered around, watching the moves, offering playful advice and reminiscing about games they had once played. Chess became another tradition, just like the books and the puzzles. It was more than a game. It was a dance of thought and memory, a reminder that the mind could still move with grace and precision when given the chance. They weren't playing for points or pride. They were playing to stay sharp, to stay connected, to enjoy the moment of concentration that pushed everything else aside. And then there was Margaret. She had joined the group quietly, introduced by a neighbor. At first, she just listened. A widow in her early 80s, Margaret had spent much of her recent years alone, filling the silence with television and radio. But as she listened to the laughter and the friendly debates, she began to feel something stir inside her. One afternoon, she spoke up during a book discussion, offering a thoughtful insight that led to a lively conversation. That small step led to another and another. Margaret began bringing her own books to share. She joined the puzzle games, even if she sometimes asked for help. One day, she confessed she had always wanted to write a short story, but never thought she had the talent. George encouraged her, gently but sincerely. "Talent isn't the point," he said. "It's the trying that brings the joy." So she began. A few sentences at a time, a paragraph here and there. Her story, inspired by her youth and colored with the wisdom of age, came to life slowly, like a flower opening after a long winter. When she read it aloud to the group, her voice trembled slightly, but her words rang clear. And when she finished, there was a long pause, followed by heartfelt applause. Not polite applause, but the kind that comes from genuine admiration. The group celebrated not just her story, but her courage. Margaret had stepped into something new and found strength in it. Just like George with his piano, Helen with her chess, and the others with their books and games. Each person, in their own way, was proving that the mind is not a candle that burns down with time, but a fire that can be reignited again and again. Their days continued, filled with stories and laughter, with quiet moments and shared discoveries. What began as a simple walk in the park had become a lifeline, a tapestry of experiences woven together by a desire to keep growing. The puzzles and the piano were not ends in themselves. They were expressions of a larger truth, that the mind is most alive when it is engaged, when it is learning, when it is surrounded by others who believe in its worth. And in that season, George and his friends learned the most important lesson of all, that keeping the mind alive is not about resisting age, but about embracing the gifts it brings. Reflection, curiosity, connection. These were the tools that built their new world, not the world of youth they had left behind, but the world of wisdom and wonder that was right before them. The morning sun filtered gently through the sheer curtains of Robert's modest home. He stood at the edge of his living room rug, hands on his hips, looking at the sturdy wooden chair he had placed in front of him. At 81 years old, Robert had never thought of himself as someone who exercised. A retired postmaster from a small coastal town, he had always led an active life through work, walking, lifting, sorting. But after retirement, his days grew quieter, more sedentary. Tasks that once felt effortless now required more time, more breath, more thought. Bending to tie his shoes or carrying groceries up the porch steps sometimes left him winded. He wasn't afraid, but he had noticed the change. He had felt it in his bones, in the way he now leaned more on the railing as he climbed the stairs. It wasn't until his grandson, Liam, came to visit one summer that the shift began. Liam, studying physical therapy in college, had gently encouraged him to try a few light exercises. Nothing too intense, just movements to stay strong. "Grandpa," he had said, kneeling beside him, "you're stronger than you think. You don't need to run marathons, you just need to move." Robert chuckled at the time, brushing it off. But those words lingered. One day, after watching a documentary about aging and independence, something clicked. Robert remembered an old friend who had fallen and broken his hip, a man once as active as any other, now unable to walk without assistance. It wasn't the fall that had changed his life, Robert realized. It was the loss of strength that had made the fall so dangerous in the first place. That night, he sat with a notepad and jotted down a plan. Not a perfect plan, just a beginning. The next morning, he placed a chair in front of him and began what Liam had shown him. Sit, then stand. Sit, then stand again. Slowly, carefully, using his legs, not his arms. It was harder than he expected, but it wasn't painful. It was awakening. He felt his muscles stretch and respond as if they had been waiting for this invitation. Over the weeks, he added more movements. Wall push-ups to strengthen his arms and chest. Light dumbbells, repurposed soup cans at first for curls. Side leg lifts to steady his balance. He began to feel different. Not like a young man again, but like himself, only steadier. Walking became smoother, his steps firmer. He no longer needed to pause at the top of the stairs. Even his posture improved, and with it, his confidence. He brought his routine to the Saturday group in the park. "Don't laugh," he said with a smile, "but I've started doing exercises in my living room, and I swear I feel better than I have in years." To his surprise, several others leaned in, curious. Helen mentioned that her daughter had been urging her to try yoga. Margaret admitted she had stopped kneeling in the garden because her legs felt too weak. They began to share stories of stiffness and hesitation, and in doing so, they realized how common their experiences were. Inspired, they asked Robert to demonstrate a few movements during one of their meetups. So beneath the old oak tree, chairs were pulled into a circle, and with light hearts, they began. They laughed as they wobbled through squats, encouraged each other through modified planks, and clapped after a round of wall push-ups. It was playful, almost childlike, and it was deeply healing. Each movement reminded them of what they still had, not what they had lost. As the weeks passed, the Saturday group began each meeting with 10 minutes of gentle strength training. They called it the warm-up, though they knew it was much more than that. It was a declaration. They were not giving in to the slow fade of age. They were investing in themselves, one squat, one push, one breath at a time. The benefits were undeniable. Helen reported fewer aches in the morning. Margaret, once nervous about gardening, was back among her roses. George, the pianist, said he felt more energy during his practice. And Robert, well, Robert no longer leaned on the railing when he climbed the steps. He stood taller. He moved with purpose. And when Liam returned for the holidays, he found his grandfather stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. Strength, they learned, was not about lifting heavy things. It was about lifting themselves, out of stagnation, out of fear, out of the quiet erosion that often comes with the passing years. Every movement was a choice to remain capable, connected, and in control. And more than anything, it was a reminder that even in later years, the body still responds to care. It still grows, still strengthens, still supports the life you wish to live. All it asks is that you believe in it, just enough to begin. In the quiet moments of the late afternoon, when the sun dips low and paints golden streaks across the neighborhood rooftops, Margaret would often sit on her front porch, a cup of chamomile tea resting gently in her hands. Her house, once filled with laughter, music, and the gentle hum of daily life, had grown still in the years since her husband passed. The silence was not unbearable, but it was persistent, settling into her days like a shadow that moved from room to room. For a long time, Margaret had convinced herself that solitude was simply part of growing older. Her children were busy with lives of their own. Her closest friends had either moved away or passed on, and the invitations to dinner or book clubs became fewer as the years crept forward. She still made her bed each morning, still cooked her meals and paid her bills, but something inside her had gone quiet. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like a gentle numbness, a slow forgetting of how it felt to be truly seen, truly heard. One breezy spring afternoon, as she sipped her tea and watched the leaves dance on the sidewalk, she heard laughter from across the street. A group of neighbors, younger and older alike, were gathered under the shade of a maple tree, chatting animatedly, some with books in hand, others with plates of homemade cookies. She hesitated to look too long, not wanting to seem nosy, but her heart ached just a little at the warmth of it all. And then, as if the universe had sensed her longing, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes waved at her. "Come join us," she called out. "We'd love to have you." Margaret paused. She glanced at the empty teacup in her hand, at the slippers on her feet. Her instinct was to smile politely and retreat inside. But something, perhaps the echo of her younger self, or perhaps the loneliness that had grown too heavy, nudged her forward. She stood up, brushed off her cardigan, and walked across the street. That day, that one decision to step into the circle changed everything. The group welcomed her with easy conversation, soft laughter, and an unspoken understanding that they were all seeking something similar: connection. They discussed books, shared childhood stories, exchanged recipes. No one cared how old she was or how long she had been alone. They only cared that she was there. Weeks turned into months, and Margaret found herself returning to the group often. She joined a local book club, then a small volunteer group at the library, and even began attending weekly dances at the community center, something she hadn't done in over 30 years. With each new connection, she felt pieces of herself returning. Her voice grew stronger, her laughter louder. She smiled more. She remembered what it felt like to belong. Margaret's story, though deeply personal, is far from unique. As we age, the importance of social ties becomes even more vital, not just for our happiness, but for our health. Human beings are inherently social creatures. From the moment we are born, we seek comfort, companionship, understanding. That need does not fade with age. If anything, it becomes more profound. Studies have shown that loneliness and isolation can be just as damaging to our health as smoking or obesity. Social disconnection increases the risk of depression, cognitive decline, and even heart disease. On the other hand, people who maintain strong relationships tend to live longer, recover more quickly from illness, and report higher levels of satisfaction with life. But connection doesn't always mean grand social events or large groups. Sometimes it's as simple as a phone call with an old friend, a heartfelt conversation with a neighbor, or attending a weekly coffee gathering at a local cafe. These moments, small as they may seem, create a web of support, a reminder that we are not alone. Even digital communication can bridge the gap. Margaret, once skeptical of technology, learned to use video calls to speak with her grandchildren who lived across the country. Seeing their faces, hearing about their school days and hobbies, filled her with a joy she hadn't realized she missed. The sound of their laughter became a melody in her home once again. Connection also stimulates the brain in powerful ways. Conversations encourage critical thinking, memory recall, and emotional expression. Sharing stories, debating ideas, or even listening with empathy keeps the mind sharp and the spirit light. Social interactions challenge us to grow, to learn, to understand perspectives beyond our own. And beyond the science and the studies, there is the simple truth that connection brings meaning. It reminds us that we matter, that our experiences, our thoughts, our presence hold value, that someone, somewhere, looks forward to hearing our voice. Margaret often reflected on how close she had come to letting herself fade into the background of her own life. How easy it would have been to remain on that porch to sip her tea alone and accept the silence. But she didn't. She chose to reach out, to say yes. And in doing so, she found not just companionship, but purpose. Each week now, she writes a postcard to someone she knows, an old friend, a neighbor, a cousin she hasn't spoken to in years. She joins the morning walks at the community park, not just for the exercise, but for the conversation. And every Sunday, she invites someone new to share a meal with her. Sometimes it's just soup and bread, but always it's nourishing. Margaret's life, once quiet and still, has become vibrant again. Not because she chased excitement, but because she embraced connection. She opened her heart to the people around her, and in return, found herself held by a network of laughter, kindness, and belonging. In the end, it's not the number of people in our lives that matters most. It's the depth of those relationships. A single heartfelt connection can be enough to light up even the darkest day. And for those willing to reach out, to open a door, or simply wave from across the street, the rewards are immeasurable. So, wherever you are on your journey, remember this. Connection is not a luxury. It's a lifeline, a path to health, happiness, and the kind of joy that endures. And it is always, always within reach. There was something quietly powerful about the way Thomas moved through his mornings. At 79 years old, he had no strict schedule, no pressing obligations, yet his days were filled with purpose. He would rise with the sun, stretch gently by the window, and begin his day with a warm glass of water and a few deep breaths. There was no rush, no need to prove anything to the world. His life, once a whirlwind of deadlines, meetings, and responsibilities, had slowed. But in that slowness, he found something more meaningful, a rhythm, a balance, a kind of quiet joy. Thomas hadn't always lived this way. In the early years of retirement, he felt adrift. Without the structure of work, he found himself spending hours in front of the television, eating without intention, and letting the days slip by. He missed the clarity of purpose he once had, the small victories, the sense of forward movement. It wasn't until a routine checkup with his doctor revealed high blood pressure and early signs of prediabetes that he realized something had to change. Not with urgency or fear, but with a deep desire to live the rest of his years not just longer, but better. He began with one small change, a daily walk around the block. At first, it tired him more than he expected, but he stuck with it. A week later, he added more fresh vegetables to his meals. Then, he swapped his nightly soda for herbal tea. Slowly, gently, Thomas began to feel different, not only physically, but mentally. He had more energy, he slept better, he smiled more. And with every small improvement, his confidence grew. That's the truth about change. It doesn't require drastic upheaval or grand gestures. the most profound transformations often begin with the simplest acts. A 10-minute walk, a moment of stillness before breakfast, choosing water over soda, listening instead of reacting. These choices, though seemingly minor, accumulate. They create momentum, and eventually they build a life that feels deliberate, whole, and deeply fulfilling. Aging is often framed as a decline, a slow letting go of the joys of youth. But what if it was instead seen as a time of refinement, a period where the clutter falls away, and what remains are the moments and choices that truly matter? For Thomas, aging became an invitation to live with more presence, more care, more kindness toward himself and others. Every step forward, no matter how small, is progress. Thomas became a quiet example to those around him, not because he gave speeches or boasted about his habits, but because people could feel it, in the way he listened with full attention, in the ease of his movements, in the lightness that seemed to follow him like a gentle breeze. He carried himself not with the weight of years, but with the wisdom they had given him. Neighbors began to notice. A woman who walked her dog past his porch each morning waved a little longer, eventually stopping to chat. A widower down the street asked about the herbs in his window box, and soon they were exchanging tips on planting thyme and parsley. Even the grocery clerk began commenting on the regular bundles of greens and fresh produce in Thomas's cart. His life, once drifting in quiet routine, had blossomed into a gentle web of daily joys and human connection. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it was enough, more than enough. Because Thomas had come to understand something simple, yet often forgotten in the busy striving of youth, that fulfillment is rarely found in grand milestones, but in the consistency of small, meaningful choices. It's in the pause to enjoy a warm cup of tea, in the decision to stretch rather than slump, in the courage to try something new, even if imperfectly. And so, as the seasons turned and his hair grew whiter, Thomas moved through his life not with resistance, but with grace. He was not trying to outrun age, he was walking hand in hand with it, respecting it, learning from it. And in doing so, he had crafted a rhythm of living that others quietly began to follow. Because health is not simply the absence of illness, it is the presence, and Thomas had chosen each day to be intentional, with his body, with his mind, and with the time he had left. And in that choice, he found peace. And in the end, that's the heart of it all. This life, at any age, is still yours to shape. The stories of Thomas, Margaret, Robert, George, and so many others are not just gentle reminders, they are quiet calls to action. Not the kind that demands grand transformation overnight, but the kind that whispers, begin where you are, begin with what you have. Because wellness isn't about chasing youth, it's about honoring the body and spirit you carry right now. When you nourish your body with good food, you're saying, I deserve to feel well. When you move even just a little, you're saying, I believe in my strength. When you reach out, when you laugh, when you listen, you're saying, I still want to grow, connect, and live fully. This is what it means to age well. To choose each day not as a downhill slope, but as fertile ground. A place where wisdom, kindness, curiosity, and care can continue to bloom. So take that walk, share that story, write that letter, stir the soup and invite someone to your table. Watch the sun rise and know that simply by being here, you matter. Your days matter. Your choices matter. And most of all, your story is still unfolding. Let it be one of intention, of joy, of quiet courage. Let it be one that lights the way for others. Because no matter the number of candles on the cake, there is still so much life to savor. And you are still becoming. As Thomas likes to say, I may be older, but I'm not done growing. And every day I wake up is another chance to get it just a little more right. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Eleanor sat by the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, watching the sun rise gently over her garden. At 83, her body moved slower, her hair had faded to soft silver, and her days were more peaceful than they had ever been. But within her, there remained a steady fire, a quiet but unwavering sense of purpose that gave every day color, direction, and meaning. In the early years of retirement, Eleanor had struggled with the stillness. She missed the rhythm of teaching, the faces of eager students, the way her work once shaped the lives of others. Without her role in the classroom, she felt adrift. The hours stretched long, and despite the comfort of home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. But instead of resigning herself to that emptiness, Eleanor decided to seek out a new kind of purpose, one not defined by career or productivity, but by connection, creativity, and care. It started small. She began writing letters to her grandchildren, not just brief notes, but stories, tales from her childhood, reflections on love, forgiveness, the power of kindness. To her surprise, they wrote back. Her words, she learned, mattered. They were not just memories, but bridges between generations, between hearts. This gave her days structure. More importantly, it reminded her that even this new chapter of life, her voice still held meaning. Purpose doesn't always come in the form of grand projects or lofty ambitions. Sometimes, it's as simple as showing up for someone else, as steady as nurturing a garden, or as quiet as creating something beautiful with your hands. Eleanor's letters became part of her daily rhythm, and soon after, she began volunteering at the local library, leading story time for children. Her gentle voice, her patience, her warm presence, these were things that couldn't be replaced by technology or time. She wasn't just filling hours, she was shaping lives. There's a powerful connection between purpose and health, both mental and physical. Numerous studies have shown that older adults who maintain a sense of purpose live longer, experience less cognitive decline, and report greater overall happiness. A reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to give, to create, to connect, has the ability to transform not only our outlook but our biology. Purpose stimulates the brain, strengthens emotional resilience, and even boosts the immune system. It's one of the most potent tools we have for aging well. Eleanor's story is not unique in its struggle, but it is rare in its outcome. Many older adults, when faced with the slowing pace of life, retreat inward, believing their most meaningful contributions are behind them. But that simply isn't true. Purpose does not belong to the young. It belongs to the willing, to those who choose to keep offering themselves to the world, no matter their age. There is something incredibly life-affirming about waking up with a reason to care, not because you have to, but because you choose to. Whether it's tending a garden, mentoring a neighbor, painting, knitting, baking, calling a friend, or offering a smile to someone who needs it, these acts are not small. They're sacred. They shape not just days, but the people around us. Eleanor used to think of her later years as a slow winding down, a gentle closing of the curtain. But what she discovered was a second bloom, a time when life, though quieter, held a deeper, richer flavor. The joy of watching children's eyes light up as she read aloud, the tenderness of a letter arriving in her mailbox from a granddaughter now away at college, the sense of pride she felt when she prepared a home-cooked meal for her neighbor recovering from surgery. These moments weren't flashy, they weren't broadcast or praised, but they made her life deeply, undeniably meaningful. Purpose doesn't have to look like a mission. It can be a feeling, a sense that your presence matters, that your day is not just about passing time, but about giving time its texture. It can be about creating something new or about preserving something precious, about reaching out even when it's easier to pull back. It's found in caring, in remembering that we are not alone, that we still have something to give, and that the world still needs what only we can offer. If you're wondering what your purpose might be in this stage of life, start by asking yourself, what brings me a sense of peace? What fills me with quiet joy? What am I curious about? Who might need a kind word or a helping hand? Purpose is rarely loud, but it always answers when you listen for it. Eleanor still starts each morning at the window with tea in hand and pen nearby. Her garden grows just outside, and her heart continues to open, one act of meaning at a time. Her days are full, not in the way they once were, but in a new, deeper way. And in that fullness, she has found not only health and happiness, but a life that still feels beautifully, powerfully her own note. In the stillness of early dawn, long before the hum of life began outside her windows, Grace would sit cross-legged on the cushioned floor of her sunroom, hands resting gently in her lap, eyes closed. She had no need for incense or complicated rituals, just her breath, the light filtering through the curtains, and the silence that wrapped around her like a soft blanket. At 78, Grace had discovered a gift she wished she had found decades earlier, the transformative peace of mindfulness. For most of her life, Grace had moved at the pace of the world. She was a mother of four, a nurse, a caretaker, a planner. Her days had been full of appointments, lists, and the needs of others. She had always taken pride in how much she could juggle, how she kept everything moving. But she also remembered with a touch of sadness how often she ignored her own needs. In her 60s, after her husband passed away and the children moved out, the silence of the house became overwhelming. It was then, out of necessity more than curiosity, that she attended her first meditation class at the community center. She didn't expect much. 10 minutes of breathing exercises and quiet sitting felt strange, even uncomfortable. Her thoughts raced, her mind wandered, but the instructor had said something that stayed with her. You don't have to stop the thoughts, just stop chasing them. Those words opened something in her, a sense that she didn't need to control every moment, that letting go could be just as powerful as holding on. As Grace began to weave mindfulness into her routine, everything shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small, almost imperceptible changes. She noticed the warmth of the sun on her hands as she drank her tea. She heard the rustle of the trees more clearly when she walked to the mailbox. She paused before reacting when she was upset. Over time, the moments of stillness she carved out became not just a habit, but a sanctuary. Science now supports what Grace experienced firsthand, that mindfulness can have profound effects on both mental and physical health, especially as we age. Daily practices like meditation, deep breathing, and even gentle reflection have been shown to reduce stress, improve sleep, lower blood pressure, and enhance emotional well-being. For older adults who may face new uncertainties, changes in routine, or the weight of past regrets, mindfulness offers a powerful anchor. It invites calm, clarity, and compassion toward oneself and the world. Grace found that her morning practice allowed her to respond to life with more patience. When she forgot where she had placed her glasses, she no longer panicked or criticized herself. When her joints ached, she observed the discomfort without letting it define her entire day. When memories surfaced, of hard times, of loss, of love, she let them rise and fall like waves without judgment. She discovered that mindfulness was not about achieving perfect peace, but about noticing what was real and choosing to meet it with kindness. Beyond meditation, Grace began journaling. Each night before bed, she wrote down 3 things she had noticed that day: the color of the sky at dusk, the taste of her soup, the voice of her daughter on the phone. This simple practice helped her stay rooted in gratitude. It reminded her that even on quiet days, life was still unfolding with beauty and grace. Mindfulness also helped her listen more deeply to others and to herself. When friends came over, she found herself more present in their conversations, not rushing to offer advice or fill the silence. When she felt lonely, she allowed herself to sit with the feeling, to understand it, rather than push it away. This self-awareness made her stronger, not weaker. It gave her the tools to live with intention, to make peace with her past, and to step into each new day with openness. Many people think of mindfulness as something elusive, reserved for monks or mystics. But Grace knew the truth. It belonged to anyone willing to pause and breathe. You don't need a retreat center or a perfect setting. You just need to come back to yourself, to notice the rhythm of your breath, the beat of your heart, the weight of your body resting in the chair, to say, I am here, and that is enough. In a world that often praises speed and productivity, mindfulness invites slowness. It honors presence. It whispers that there is value not only in doing, but in being. For older adults, this message is a balm. It reminds us that life's richest moments are often the quietest. The way light falls through the window, the sound of laughter in the distance, the feeling of peace after a deep breath. Grace still sits in her sunroom each morning. Some days her mind is still busy. Some days her knees ache. But always, always she returns to her breath, to the soft rhythm of now. She knows she can't change the past, and she doesn't know what the future will bring. But in this moment, she is present. And in that presence, she finds peace. In the quiet corners of our lives, beyond the busyness of errands and the routine of habits, lies a question that often rises as the years advance. What will I leave behind? It's not about money, nor about trophies on the wall, or the titles we once held. It's about legacy, the silent echo of how we lived, how we loved, and how we touched the lives of others. For many older adults, this question becomes more than a thought. It becomes a calling. Harold was a quiet man with deep eyes and a gentleness in the way he spoke. At 83, he had lived a full life. He had worked as a mail carrier in a small town, raised 3 children with his late wife, and played harmonica on his front porch every Sunday evening. To most people, he seemed like an ordinary man. But what made Harold remarkable wasn't his job or the medals tucked away in his drawer. It was the way he made others feel seen. Every child on his mail route remembered him not just as the mailman, but as the man who remembered birthdays and offered a kind word on tough days. When neighbors were grieving, Harold showed up with soup and silence. When a new family moved in, he brought cookies and curiosity, not just to welcome them, but to truly know them. He was never in a rush. He believed that the most valuable thing you could give someone was your undivided attention. After his retirement, Harold began writing letters, not emails, not texts, but handwritten letters to his children, grandchildren, and even former co-workers. Some were filled with memories, others with life lessons, and some were simply notes of gratitude. He wanted them to know what he had learned, what he had loved, and what he hoped for them. These letters became treasured keepsakes, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. They were Harold's legacy, pieces of his heart inked onto paper. Leaving a legacy isn't about grand gestures. It's about living each day with intention. It's the stories you share at the dinner table, the wisdom you offer when someone feels lost, the way you keep traditions alive. It's planting a tree knowing you may never sit under its shade. It's teaching your grandson how to tie a fishing knot, or passing down your mother's recipe for cornbread, or recording your voice reading bedtime stories so your great-grandchildren can hear them someday. For some, legacy means creating something tangible, a photo album, a family history, a journal of memories. For others, it's the values they model, the kindness they practice, the way they make others feel safe. The truth is, every action we take writes a line in the story we leave behind. Research shows that having a sense of legacy or purpose in later life can increase happiness, reduce feelings of isolation, and even improve health outcomes. When we feel that our lives matter, that our experiences and love are passed on, we experience a deeper sense of fulfillment. And those we leave behind carry that love forward, shaped and strengthened by our presence. But legacy isn't something we only build at the end. It is something we create every day in the smallest choices. It's in the patience we show when others are struggling. It's in the compassion we extend when we could turn away. It's in the courage to share our stories, not just the highlights, but the hard moments too. Because when we are vulnerable, we give others permission to be real. And in that space of honesty, connection is born. There is a story of an old man who sat on a bench every morning near the school. He smiled at the children passing by, offered gentle waves, and listened to anyone who stopped to talk. He never missed a day. When he passed away, dozens of children attended his memorial, each one sharing how his quiet presence had made them feel less alone. He never gave a speech, he never wrote a book, but his legacy lived on in their hearts. Legacy is not what you leave for people, it's what you leave in them. It's the mark of a well-lived life, not measured in achievements, but in moments of love, grace, and quiet influence. As you move through your days, remember that the way you treat others, the care you give, and the joy you cultivate are all part of your lasting imprint. You may never know how far your kindness travels, but trust that it does. Like a stone dropped in a pond, your presence ripples outward in ways you may never see. So take the time to tell your stories, write the letter, make the phone call, laugh, cry, listen. These are the threads that will be woven into the tapestry of your legacy. And when one day someone says your name with warmth in their voice and remembers how you made them feel, that will be your legacy, alive and thriving, long after you are gone. The sun rises each day, not just as a marker of time, but as a quiet invitation, a reminder that no matter your age, no matter your past, you are still here, and life is still unfolding. The final part of this journey, perhaps the most meaningful, is understanding that every morning is a fresh beginning, a new chance to choose how we live, how we love, and how we care for ourselves and others. Helen was 79 when she stood by her window one morning, watching the first light spill across her backyard. The garden she once tended with enthusiasm had grown wild in recent years, overtaken by time and weeds. Her husband had passed away 5 years earlier, and since then the days had blended into one another. Mornings had become quieter, lonelier, and she had begun to wonder if the vibrant life she once knew had finally ended with his absence. But that morning, something shifted. Perhaps it was the warmth of the light, or the distant laughter of children walking to school. Perhaps it was the memory of how she used to hum while planting tomatoes, or the faded photo of her and her husband laughing under the big oak tree. Whatever it was, it stirred something inside her. She decided, without a grand plan or expectation, to begin again. She put on her coat and stepped outside. The soil was damp and soft, and as she pulled the first weeds, she noticed a small sprout of mint, something she hadn't planted in years. That moment, so simple and quiet, became the beginning of a new chapter. She didn't reclaim the entire garden in one day, but each morning after that, she did a little more. With each sunrise, she greeted the world with a gentle determination to participate in life, not just watch it pass by. We often think that renewal must come through dramatic change, but in truth, the most powerful beginnings often arrive gently. They come when you choose to get out of bed with hope, even if yesterday was hard. They arrive when you decide to make a healthy breakfast, go for a walk, reach out to someone, or smile at a stranger. They bloom when you choose compassion over judgment, curiosity over fear, love over regret. Each new day offers a chance to reconnect with your body, your mind, your passions, and your people. It invites you to revisit the habits that bring you peace and energy. Maybe it's taking time to stretch your legs, to breathe deeply in the morning light, or to read something that expands your perspective. Maybe it's turning on music and letting it move through you as you cook, clean, or simply rest. These are not small things. They are lifelines, threads of vitality that remind you of your aliveness. One of the greatest gifts of growing older is the wisdom to know that life is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about choosing joy not because everything is easy, but because you've learned how precious each moment is. You begin to value the slow walks, the long talks, the shared silences. You begin to savor the taste of tea, the feeling of sunlight on your skin, the sound of laughter echoing through a quiet room. Even the hard days have something to offer. They ask you to be gentle with yourself, to rest, to reflect, to reach out. They remind you of your strength, not the kind that lifts weights, but the kind that lifts spirits, especially your own. When you choose life each morning, you become a light for others too. You show them that aging is not about decline, but about discovery. That every stage of life has something sacred to offer. You show your children and grandchildren how to meet change with grace, how to find beauty in simplicity, how to live fully with an open heart. And so, as this story draws to a close, remember this: you are not too old. It is not too late. Today is just beginning, and so are you. You have everything you need to live a life that is rich with meaning, full of connection, and guided by the quiet, steady strength that only comes with time. Take a deep breath. Feel the earth under your feet. Look around and notice the small wonders, the birds, the breeze, the people who care about you. Let this be your reminder. You are still part of something beautiful, still capable of joy, still a vital thread in the great tapestry of life. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again, let it find you ready to live, to love, to learn, and to begin anew.